Hi everyone. In this video, I will be guiding you through my framework for futurity for working with Indigenous texts. I will highlight my text of choice, Be a Good Ancestor, and hopefully give some good ideas for incorporating this in an interdisciplinary fashion. And lastly, I'll touch on the total physical response method with storytelling. This is something that I like to incorporate when teaching. This is specifically helpful for language learning. So in this slide, I'm just throwing it back to my framework for futurity. It's called Assuming Responsibility to be Rooted in Reconciliation. So this comes directly from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Canada. And I sort of centered my framework around that, building awareness, acknowledgement, atonement, and reflection in putting that into action. So this really helps students and myself to remind us that what we learn in the text and then how we behave afterwards has an impact, not just on ourselves, but the people around us as well. So how do we do that in the best way possible? So my text of choice is Be a Good Ancestor. Now, of course, this is primarily a children's book. However, I think it's wonderful for all ages, which is why I chose it, and particularly for, learning a new language or revitalizing a language, for example. It can be a good starting point for that as well. So it's written by Leona Prince and Gabrielle Prince. They are both from Lake Babai Nation in British Columbia. And stunning artwork is done by Carla Joseph. She is a Cree and Métis artist from Prince George, BC as well. And I've chosen to show this book in no particular page order. So this is not the order of the book. However, I chose a few of my favorite pages, and I hope to guide you through some ways that they can be incorporated in multiple different disciplines in the classroom. Be a good ancestor with living things that swim. Eggs become fry, fry become elevens, elevens become sockeyes, sockeyes become nourishment. Be a good ancestor with living things that walk. Newborns become cubs, cubs become young bears become grizzlies, grizzlies become balance. So depending on what grade you teach, this could be incorporated into a science lesson, for example, and life cycles come to mind when I think of this. Also, the dot art, the beautiful dot art is part of Indigenous artwork. And you could obviously have an art lesson on this, or even use it as a math lesson. You know, how many, depending on what grade you're teaching, you could count the dots or group the dots and things like that. So this could definitely be used as a math lesson as well. Be a good ancestor with water. Raindrops become puddles, puddles become streams, streams become rivers, rivers become life. Be a good ancestor with the land. Seeds become seedlings, seedlings become trees, trees become forests, and forests become oxygen. So again, science comes to mind, so does art. You could do beautiful artwork with your kids or with any age group really on northern lights. It's really easy to do with charcoal or something along those lines. But also a really good land-based learning activity. You could, perhaps plant some trees with your students or go out into the playground or wherever you're able to and look at the different trees and look at bodies of water if you're able to, and incorporate that into a science lesson as well. So it's a really good opportunity to incorporate land-based learning as well. Be a good ancestor with your thoughts. Thoughts become ideas, ideas become actions, actions become movements, movements become change. Be a good ancestor with your words. Words become expressions, expressions become stories, stories become narratives, narratives become truth. So here social studies comes to mind, not just about land or geography or politics, but your positionality within the world around you. So this would make good for the impact that students have directly in social studies. A lot of the time, reading a textbook, or they're not sure how to connect with social studies, and I think this is a really good way for students to position themselves and identify with the text for how they can make meaningful changes or impact the world around them. Health and wellness also comes to mind here. We could, do a lesson on thoughts and feelings and identifying those things and how important it is to interact with one another in a positive way. Be a good ancestor with your neighbors. Neighbors become friends. Friends become communities. Communities become nations. Nations become allies. Be a good ancestor with yourself. Children become adults. Adults become leaders. Leaders become elders. Elders become ancestors. So this kind of brings learning in a full circle here. Again, social studies comes to mind, having that direct impact on the world around you. And how important it is not to just have these relationships within school, but taking that beyond the classroom and how you interact with the people in your home, and going back to that framework, the impact that you have on your community in that regard, and then from there outwards. I also like to touch on, there's a lady drumming in the middle. I don't know if it's a lady or a child. But you could also bring up the idea of music and why music is so important in every culture. I've heard very many times that music is a universal language. It's one everybody can speak. So what are students' ideas on that? How can you build on that? And maybe even do a music lesson. Can we find a drum and bring it into the classroom? Or ask students what kind of music they have in their cultures, and it's a way of bringing people together in that regard. So English language arts happens to be my specialization in the community-based Bachelor of Education program. However, my dad's first language is Cree, so it is something I'm very passionate about bringing into the classroom, but it's not my first language, as it's not for many students. So this method in particular, I have to give credit to Dr. James Asher, who is an American psychologist, and it's based on the experience of how humans learn their first language. And it's a methodology that maybe many people already use and they're not even aware of it, but I'll give credit where it's due, and just go through some basic points of this method, and how to use this method in different ways, but for using any text. So different variations of this method include TPR with body, TPR with objects, TPR with pictures. So those are pretty self-explanatory. The one I want to touch on in particular is with storytelling. Storytelling is a very important Indigenous tradition. Most things are shared orally, and writing, comes secondary to people who have an Indigenous language as their first language. So putting those together and learning English or Cree or any other language, when a learner hears something in the language and physically responds to it, and we do this through storytelling, then it becomes much easier for them to learn the new language. So this acronym I actually came up with. It just helped me remember the steps a little bit easier. So establishing a meeting, asking a story, reading, and responding. And here I've given a couple different ways to do those steps. So start by introducing the vocabulary or phrases in the book or in the text that you want the students to pay attention to, and write them down for the students to see. Use all languages involved. Use your body, have actions for certain words, be vocal, and use exaggeration for certain expressions, and this will help resonate that information with students. And even prior to actually reading the story, be a guide for the students. What do they think this will be about? You could use a KWLS chart and fill it out as you go. And this is something that is extremely helpful in the classroom for me to get on the students' level. Where are they at, right? And then I learn too in the process. And then read and respond. So give formative assessment as you go, and connect each student. Invite them to share their own interpretation of events and what might come next. Invite other languages and other cultures to connect with whatever text you're using as well. This is another way that I like to learn from my students and get to know a little bit more about them. So this is a way that you can really connect with one another in your classroom, and it builds such a wonderful community. So thank you for letting me share some of my ideas with you. Thought it would be fun, just lastly, to share some pictures of various classrooms that I've worked in. I love to be active with my students and learn from them and incorporate multiple different ways of learning, and just create a safe learning space that's culturally responsive.